Hello, class, and welcome to our first mailbag, where I'll be answering questions you post to me by Saturday from the previous week's course content. We'll start off with a question from Diamond. In films like Rush Hour, does having a diverse cast in terms of race and ethnicity, does that attract more viewers to the film? Well, in a film like Rush Hour, in addition to a variety of other genres, this film is a buddy film. And it's a film about two characters, most often men, that are very different, often in terms of race. That would date back to The Defiant Ones in 1958, where Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier are a white and black, respectively white and black convicts who've escaped and need to learn to work together. There's a strong resurgence in the buddy film in the 80s with 48 Hours and Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy playing, in this case, a police officer and a felon. Now we'll see expanded sort of variations of the theme of the buddy comedy, but it's typically rooted in the odd couple, two characters who are different in personality but have to learn to work together to accomplish a goal. Certainly, making the cast more diverse may prove welcoming for a more diverse array of audiences. That said, that has as much to do with a kind of political guilt circulating in Hollywood regarding the lack of opportunities for women and people of color historically. Our next question is from Dana. Is there a difference between the brightness of key light versus fill light? In what cases would there be more or less lighting? Okay, so a balance in lighting from the key light, the fill light to fill in shadows, and a backlight also to fill in shadows, that a balance would be conventional for the golden age of Hollywood, where we really want to showcase the stars. People are going to see the faces of stars. If, however, we remove the key light and use a fill light, then that light will be projected from the side and shadows will be cast on the character's face. This might make them seem sort of divided or ambivalent or ambiguous. As I was reading about the financing in the industry from the emergence of film to now, I want to know what you think about how films are financed. This is from Megan. The contemporary financing of would-be blockbusters, films that cost $200 to $300 million, create some challenges. Very few companies have sufficient liquidity to put that cash holding, up at the beginning, because again, you have to start spending that money a year or even 2 years before the film can make any money, given the lengthy pre-production, production, and post-production processes. So, films then end up being the shared investment of an interlocking group of companies sourced around one of the 5 or 6 multimedia transnational conglomerates. These would be Warner Brothers, now Time Warner, AT&T, Disney, Sony, formerly Fox News Corp, but Disney's acquisition of Fox's film production erases them as a player, and then Viacom, probably missing one. The next question is from Patricia and focuses on the film 25th Hour. When Monty is cursing the different races and types of people in New York City, is this significant in some capacity? That part of the movie stood out to me. Well, that scene appears virtually verbatim in the 2000 novel by David Benioff. In Spike Lee's direction of the film, that invective of Monty shouting, cursing the various categories of people in New York, reproduces a similar scene from his 1989 film, Do the Right Thing. Now, Benioff had, of course, seen Do the Right Thing, but had not had that in mind when he wrote that scene in the book. So, certainly that aspect of that sharp invective, the criticism of these other groups that Monty then turns on himself, that he's the one who blew it, is certainly profane and coarse, but is also part of the texture of New York. New York is tremendously diverse, and there are plenty of times where the people of various castes do not get along with one another. Patricia also asks in what fashion the film is relevant and why I chose it. Well, Spike Lee is one of my favorite directors, and this is also a relatively small film, though it features an all-star cast. It was the conclusion of Spike Lee's contract with the producer-distributor, and as his most recent films had not done very well at the box office, this one was minimally marketed. As such, I like teaching this film because many of my students haven't even heard of it, and yet recognize some of the actors from other films, especially Ed Norton, Barry Pepper, etc. Next question from Lucas. There was some mild confusion at the end of 25th Hour. With the daydream voiceover section, we're left with the reality that Monty was imprisoned, or the happily ever after, that he's not. Is there a benefit to choosing an ending the audience would like to have versus an ending that is not so pleasant? Do these types of movies ultimately rate better because they leave you wondering? Well, ambiguity certainly is part of the goal of many storytellers and filmmakers. They don't necessarily want there to be a clear-cut, happy ending. Audiences in general, of course, prefer their endings to be clear-cut and happy. Part of the reason I chose this film as well is that rich ambiguity of the ending. Though, if we are to take the film at face value, Monty does go to prison because it would be at odds with the sort of thematic coherence of the film for it to be otherwise. Also, if you're familiar with New York geography, as the car drives north, you know that he does not take a turn and cross the river. Next question is from Brady. Is it better to be one of the last lead actors cast or to be one of the first? The payment of actors differs less based on their role in the film. In the case of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, I believe Sean Connery was paid perhaps more than anybody else, but he only appears in a single scene in the film. Similarly, Marlon Brando appears in very little of 1979's Apocalypse Now, and yet his was one of the largest salaries, just because of the nature of the gravitas as a star. Films are often put together as packages, and that package may have less to do with who is the best actor to play a part, and more it may have to do instead with what agency is that actor under contract. For example, an agent who represents 2 or 3 different actors and a screenwriter might seek to have those 2 actors play roles in that screenplay, because then that agent would make money through all 3 of those placements, the 2 actors and the screenwriter. This is the case with Jaws, where the same agent represented 2 of the actors and I believe the screenwriter, and thereby put together that package based on less who would necessarily be best at a particular role and more in terms of their financial advantage. Next question is from Alex. Towards the beginning of the film, the wife walks in the living room and sits down in her chair and sets her beer down, or what most would assume is a beer. I noticed the beer bottle was blank and did not have any writing. In films such as this, do they have to purposely remove all branding for legal reasons? I've always wondered about this. Well, Alex, many contemporary films deliberately include various brands and as a form of product placement, and they may be able to request funds, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars, for placing certain products in a film. Now that said, with smaller films, there's not going to be the advantage for a company to have their product placed. And some filmmakers, independent filmmakers like the maker of The Jap Room, may wish to avoid any potential, threat of infringement on somebody else's intellectual property, leading the film to need to be taken down. Casera asks, in Chapter 1 of our book, it talks about themes or motifs in movies, using Juno as an example. The text also mentions how every element in every frame is there for a reason. I was curious as to all the different ways movies add narrative importance to some props and not to others. For example, I wonder why the chair is significant, yet another prop from Juno, the iconic burger phone, is not, despite the fact that it was specifically chosen. Well, that's a great question. And part of this comes down to, in our study of narrative, how narrative depends on repetition and difference. Since the chair appears at crucial scenes in the film, it means differently when it appears in one instance or when it appears in another. So the burger phone may imply some aspect of Juno's quirky character, but it doesn't help drive the plot forward in the fashion that the chair, given its role in the plot in the film Juno, the chair is more important. But objects become more or less important as the film draws or fails to draw attention to them. Andrew asks, in the film 25th Hour, I noticed that the circle was a common motif. In the classroom, we see that Mary has a tattoo of a circle on her navel, followed by several shots of the students sitting in a circle, followed again by Monty mentioning the circle. Was this important, or am I reading too much into this? Now, this is actually something I hadn't noticed before, but it does make sense, given that the film, The 25th Hour, is about what happens in the 25th hour. The film takes place, with the exception of the occasional flashback, over the course of a single day, from that morning with Monty walking the dog to the next morning, and he's now, being driven to prison. So, in this sort of circular path, at the beginning of one day, at the beginning of the next day, everything changed and everything has stayed the same. And so the circle is one component of that. We could see another use of this sort of circle motif in the beginning of Sofia Coppola's 2010 film, where the film opens with a main character who we later find out is an actor, and he's driving a expensive sports car out in the desert in a circle. So he's in effect going nowhere, but he's going there fast. And this, we find out, is effectively one of the themes of the play, of the screenplay and of the film. And at the conclusion of the film, he pulls the car over, gets out, and starts walking. And in that instance, he's no longer going very fast and very expensively nowhere. He's now going deliberately somewhere. Next question is from Ashley. Does the marketing of a movie start after a movie is completely finished in editing and production? Well, it depends on the nature of the movie. Would-be blockbusters will often see their promotion campaigns begin 6 months to a year before they're released. This would be the case with the tentpole Star Wars films, episodes 7, 8, and the forthcoming 9. Other films, however, may receive functionally no marketing until they are complete and they're shown at festivals. Films shown at festivals are attempting in most cases to be picked up by a major distributor, who only then would begin marketing the film. The next question is from JR. In the short film The Jap Room, there is a scene where Vic and his wife are holding each other and Vic leaves the house. As she sits in her chair and brushes her hair, she begins to remember how she felt when he was away at war. So what's the significance of this scene? And the scene as it appears in the short story provides effectively cause for her memory. So she's brushing her hair, which makes her then remember having long hair and brushing her hair while her husband was away at war. And that is another part of sort of storytelling, narrative. Time, space, and causality. She's in this current time, but brushing her hair causes her to remember another time, triggering the opportunity to show this flashback. So the film uses the same opportunity then to create a cause for her to remember some previous time, giving us more background into the story. Our next question is from Nathan. Is the 9/11 aftermath cleanup scene actual footage filmed at the Ground Zero, the location of the fallen Twin Towers, or was it recreated and filmed on a studio backlot? Well, all of the filming locations that I've researched are in and around New York, except for the shots of the country from the end of the film and Brian Cox's voiceover. So yeah, it is my understanding that that is on location at the construction site over Ground Zero. Chanel asks, I have a question as to pay of a $200 million budget film. How do they determine... The next question is from Chanel. How do filmmakers determine how much they pay each person, and also how do they design the budget in the first place? Where does the money come from? This is a great question. So on large-scale filmmaking, films with budgets north of $100 million, that is the green light, the decision to make that film is from a studio executive, and it's going to be based on the package and what we do call in the industry above-the-line costs. These are costs known in advance, settled by contract to pay for the script, to pay the director, and to pay the principal actors. So in, say, for example, an Avengers film, with the first Avengers film, Robert Downey Jr. is going to be one of the most crucial actors and is going to, see a lot of... The next question is from Chanel. When a film has a $200 million budget, how do they determine how much they pay each person? And how does that budget get written in the first place? Where does the money come from? Well, on large-scale filmmaking, budgets north of $100 million, the film won't even be approved, greenlit in the language of the industry, by a studio executive unless the above-the-line costs have been determined. The above-the-line costs refer to the known expenses, say for example, purchasing the script, hiring the director, and hiring the key actors. So these will have to sort of be established for the film to be greenlit. So for example, Minority Report is not going to be approved by the studio producer and distributor until Steven Spielberg's direction and Tom Cruise as the primary actor are already determined, as well as the script having been approved by both Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg. But very rarely is a film distributor in position to have the liquidity to have $200 million available to fund one film, then another $150 million to make another film later in the year. So these deals are worked out in advance, and sometimes they can be really complex. One thing you can do is go to imdb.com and look at who the film distributor is, and you'll see that distribution rights may be, say, with, for example, a film by Buena Vista, which is Disney's distributor arm. Buena Vista will control the distribution rights for the DVD in the United States and over theatrical screenings in the United States. But screenings of that film overseas may be sold to a different distributor. Furthermore, rights to show the film on cable may be sold in advance. There may be product placement that takes place in the film, which also can raise thousands and even millions of dollars. So these are ways that filmmakers can start making money on a film even before the film is released in theaters and shown on screens. Now this is especially important because this involves also borrowing money. And if you borrow $100 million to make a film, well, you have to pay interest. And so over the course of, say, a year, prior to the film being released, but you need the money to purchase the screenplay and to pay actors and to pay crew and such, well, by the time that film comes out, you owe $100 million plus probably another $10 million in interest alone. So this demonstrates how some folks complain that Hollywood doesn't make movies anymore, they make deals. Because with this much money at stake and with the folks having the final say, most often being people who aren't interested in making art, but people who are interested in making money, it can be a kind of challenging and kind of a surprise that any movie comes out that is very expensive and is also very thought-provoking. All right, that wraps up our mailbag for this week. Remember to send in your questions for week 2 by the end of the week on Saturday, and I'll post the next mailbag next week. Do keep in mind that the mailbag content becomes course content once it's posted, and you're responsible for it in quizzes and exams and such. Have a great day.